Today's Super Telephoto Masterclass is all about the Macro Add-ons. So if you like bad puns, you could call it a miniature masterclass. There are two Macro Add-ons to choose from. You've got a 300mm and a 200mm, and the differences between them are the working distance, which is how closely they can focus, and the macro magnification. The working distances are actually in their names. So the 300mm will focus around 30 centimeters away, while the 200mm focuses around 20 centimeters away. And in terms of magnification, the 300mm has a magnification ratio of 0.8 to 1, while the 200mm has a magnification ratio of 1.2 to 1. And to put these ratios into context, a ratio of 1 to 1 is known as life size. And that means that your subject is captured on your image sensor at the same size as it is in real life. So if your subject in real life is 2 centimeters, then it will be projected onto the sensor at that same 2 centimeters. So here I am in the Reeflex Pro Camera App, and a third-party camera app like the Reeflex Pro Camera App is a must-have for doing macro photography with the Super Telephoto lens and Macro Add-ons, because if you try and use this setup in the stock camera app just gets confused. Plus, the stock camera app only has tap to focus available, and we really need more focusing options. So the first thing I want to show you is manual focus, which is this MF slider here. Tap it, and now I can adjust the focus by moving this slider, but it's not clear where the focus actually is. So I'm going to turn on focus peaking, which is this eye icon. Now, focus peaking is a really powerful tool because it gives you a visual overlay of where the focus is. The more green, the more that section is in focus. And you can actually see just how quickly the focus falls off. So on this book here, I only get a couple of lines in focus before everything else just becomes a blur. And that's why you have to be so careful when focusing with the macro add-ons. Now let me show you how shallow the working distance is. If I drag the manual focus slider all the way to 0, this is the minimum focusing distance. This is the closest that the macro add-on is able to focus. And if I hold the phone still and then drag the manual focus slider, the number increases and the focus shifts away from me until we get to 1. And this is the maximum focusing distance. This is the furthest away that the lens can focus. Now, if I want to focus even further down the page, I have to move the phone, or I can move the book, in this case, closer to me. But I want to stay here. I'm happy with this composition. So that's the 300mm. Now let me take it off and attach the 200mm. I love how quickly and easily I can switch between these, by the way. And now at this same distance, the picture is completely blurry because remember, the working distance is now 10 centimeters closer. So this one was 30 centimeters. Now I have to get 20 centimeters away from my subject. And if I do so, look how much closer the 200mm is than the 300mm. So if we use that ratio of 1 to 1, that life size ratio of 1 to 1 as a baseline, the 200mm macro add-on is 40% closer than the 300mm. And look at how much we get in focus now. We got a few lines with the 300. With the 200, we barely get just over 1 line. And let's see how shallow the focus range is. And so if I drag the slider all the way to 0 and put the focus on the word place and then start to drag it up here, where's it going to end up? We get a few lines at this angle. We do get a few lines. We get from place to Dumbledore. So still a lot shallower than it was before. But what if you've got a subject that doesn't lend itself to such a shallow depth of field? What if you need more in focus? Well, if that's the case, then you can use a technique called focus stacking. Now, focus stacking is where you capture multiple images at different focus distances and then merge them together later to create one final image with a larger depth of field. And I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, the main thing you need, the most important thing you need is a tripod. Everything has to be perfectly still, both the camera and your subject. So I've got my Reeflex compact tripod. And I swapped my subject because I saw the pages of that book were fluttering ever so slightly, with probably just a few pixels, and you probably could get away with that. But I didn't want to chance it while I was filming this video. So I switched subjects, and what you want to do is you want to make sure that the part of the image that is closest to the camera that you want in focus corresponds with the focus slider being 0.00. So in my case, this little fella in white here is the closest part of the image and the subject that I want in focus. And the furthest away point, let's see where I actually get. Yeah, that's nice. Ideally, just this little fella here with the boat, but let's go past him and just do the whole focus slider. Why not? So the closest part of the image should correspond with 0.00, the closest thing of your subject that you want in focus. And just to give you a little bit of context, this is my finger here, so we don't get too much. And I've switched back to the 300mm now to give you some more context. So let's start focus stacking. What do we do? Well, first of all, we set a timer, which I have done here, for 3 seconds, just to prevent camera shake. And now we can start taking photos. So we tap the shutter, timer counts down, and we capture a photo. Then we drag the focus slider to the first white line and take another photo. Now, you can use different size intervals if you want. You could just use that if you wanted and just keep taking even more photos, but it's really not necessary. In my experience, just using these larger white lines for focus stacking is absolutely perfect. Don't use too larger intervals, otherwise you get these weird areas of your image that won't be in focus. They'll be blurry. Now, this is manual focus stacking, and I happen to know that in the next version, the next major version of the Reeflex Pro Camera App, it's going to include automatic focus stacking, which is where you tell the app minimum focus distance, maximum focus distance, and how many photos in between those you want it to capture. So it'll speed this process up a lot. So I could have selected minimum focus distance 0, max 1, and captured 25 images in between. And it would have just done it for you, and it would have taken seconds. But at the moment, we have manual, which is not the end of the world. At least we have the option to do it. So that's all my images captured. Now I'm going to jump into Photoshop and Affinity Photo, show you how to merge them together and compare the results. Okay, the next step in the focus stacking process is to get your photos from your iPhone over to your computer. Now, I use a Mac, so for me, I've just used AirDrop. For you, if you've got a PC, then obviously the workflow is going to be a little bit different. As long as they make it over to your computer, then do so however you want and save them in a place that you can remember. Then, when you launch Photoshop, and I'll leave the instructions for Affinity on the screen. I'll demonstrate Photoshop live for you, just because a lot more people use Photoshop. Don't go past the home screen. Just wait for it to load up. Then click File and go to Scripts. Go to Load Files into Stack. Just leave everything selected. You can select the folder or the files. It doesn't matter. Now, these are all original height files. You can edit your photos before you do this. In fact, I would recommend if you want to edit, do so before you focus stack. Because, for example, if you've shot in ProRAW, which is a DNG file format, and you get loads of editing flexibility. And then when you stack the images together and export, then you're going to export in something like PNG or a JPEG, and you're going to lose that editing fidelity and all that information. So edit your photos beforehand if you've shot in RAW or ProRAW, something like that. Now, all the images are loaded in here. There's 16 of them. And we're going to click Attempt to automatically align. Attempt is a bit of a funny one because there's no attempt here necessary. It's definitely going to auto align the images because we used a tripod. There's no guesswork necessary. Now, I'm going to click OK. and there's only 16 images it has to load in and auto align. Now I have a brand new M4 MacBook Pro. It's got like 32 gigabytes of RAM. It's got a brand new M4 Pro chip in it. Yet this process will take a long time, even on this brand new computer. It just is what it is. So give yourself a minute for that to happen. And the reason we actually need to auto-align them is because of focus breathing. Yes, everything was kept exactly the same with the tripod, composition, the subject, everything like that. But as you move the focus manually, the lens actually adjusts every time you adjust the focus, and you need to compensate for that by auto-aligning the images. So it's auto-aligned, and you can see this little blue line here, and as I hover over, you can see it going over the layers where each layer is. So that is where the focus has adjusted, and it only affects the outer parts of the image, not the bit that we actually care about. So we can crop this bit out later. Now what you do is everything has been loaded in. You select all of your images by, you can choose the bottom one, come up to the top, shift click the top one, then come up to edit and go to auto blend layers. And this process is very fast. We want seamless tones and colors because why not if you're offering? And we just wait for this load and keep an eye on the depth of field here. It's about to snap into focus. There we are, look at that. We zoom in a little bit and we have now got perfect focus across our little scene here, and it fades off nicely into the background, which is brilliant. There's no gaps in the focus because we used enough images. And now the only thing left to do is to crop a little bit. So if you select 4:3, which is the native aspect ratio of the iPhone's sensor, then you can make sure that you keep as much of the image as possible and crop in, and you are good to go. So that is photo stacking in Photoshop. But we are not done yet. Far from it, because now I'm going to show you how to nail your focus when you're outside running and gunning, handheld, and the subjects aren't exactly staying still. Now, you can use the manual focus settings that I've just shown you when your subjects are actually staying still. But when they're not, then you want something that's a bit more automatic, and that is where I love the focus reticle. To activate the focus reticle, just take 2 fingers and tap on the screen and 2 reticles pop up. Now the one with the sun is the exposure reticle, but the one we're concerned about is the focus reticle, the one with the plus. And you can move this around freely, and wherever you leave it, the lens will focus, as long as you're within the Macro Add-ons working distance. And wherever you leave this focus reticle, it's going to stay on the screen and serve as a permanent reminder of where your focus is. And this is an incredibly powerful tool for tracking moving subjects like insects, and it's going to automatically adjust the focus if the insect moves a bit towards you or you move towards it. Again though, all within the working distance. So let's jump into a screen recording showing you this step by step with some handheld macro action. Here I was following a bee around from flower to flower. I have focus peaking turned on to assist me, and as I move the focus reticle over the bee, the focus shifts to it, as confirmed by lots of lovely green from the focus peaking over the bee. But look at the distance meter, it reads 0, which means I'm right on the edge of the working distance. And that also means that my focus is also on a knife edge. If I was to move any closer by millimeters, I wouldn't get the shot in focus, and unfortunately that is exactly what happened. I moved a little bit closer, I took the shot, and I missed. On my next couple of attempts, the opposite happened. This time the distance meter read 1, so I was too far away, and I remember I was just too eager to get the shot before the bee flew away. But I saw that it read 1 this time before I took the shot, so I moved closer. The distance meter now read a healthy 0.72, and then wham! I took the shot, I nailed that little bugger, and I captured one of my favorite macro photos from the Super Telephoto's Kickstarter campaign. And if I play you the screen recording back at full speed, you will see how quickly this all played out in real time. And you can see me there just spamming the shutter, making sure that I have a shot in focus. And I recommend that you do the same. There is no shame in it. It's what we need to do to get the shot. Next, let's talk about your macro photos themselves and the key factors behind great Super Telephoto macro photos. One of the most fundamental aspects of shooting with the Super Telephoto lens, whether that's general photography or macro photography, is understanding how to work with telephoto compression. Telephoto compression makes the background and the foreground appear closer to the subject than they actually are. And combined with the lens's shallow depth of field, this creates strong subject isolation, making the subject pop against a blurred background. And while this compression can be a powerful tool, it is not suitable for every subject and every composition. It works best when your scene has depth, and you create depth by having something in the foreground or something in the background, but ideally both. Without depth, the Super Telephoto's highly compressed images can feel flat and less interesting. But I'm going to show you how you can prevent your images from looking flat, and you can take advantage of this compression and use it as a strength. So let's go through some examples. First, we have this 200mm shot of a frozen spider's web. It's sharp and has an interesting texture, but it's lacking colour and contrast. Plus, the subject of the image, the web, spans the entire frame and it's on the same plane of focus throughout the scene, meaning there's nothing in the foreground to lead the eye into the frame, and the background has been compressed to the point of completely disappearing. And as a result, the image lacks depth and it's not a pleasing photo. But we can improve it by adding a splash of colour and a spider. With the spider, our eyes now have somewhere more definitive to focus, but there's still nothing in the foreground to lead our eye to it, and the background is still highly compressed to the point of almost completely disappearing, but at least now it has some colour and some shapes, which makes it a bit more interesting. Compare this though to the 300mm version of the exact same shot. The background is less compressed and less blurred, which reveals a more interesting range of colours and shapes, and the shot looks more 3D, but we can still do better by making a slight change to our composition, which was taking our phone, lifting up and looking down. We now have a pleasing path through these images. The webs are a blurry part of the foreground that leads us to the spiders in sharp focus, and then they fade off into the background, which is a sea of blurred shapes and colours that contrast against the spider. These images are still very compressed, but that compression is now working for us because the images have an added sense of depth. Here's another before and after of a tiny bug looking flat, but with a very slight raise of the phone again, we now get the top surface of this wooden post behind it as a background element. Another factor that's crucial to your Super Telephoto macro success is lighting. Take this spider example again. Here's the wider context of the photo. It's an early September evening before golden hour, and the sun is still coming in quite harshly, as you can see by the bushes in the background and the shadows. But the spider, it's actually in the shade. It's being lit nice and softly, and that soft light was perfect for the spider, and it also gave a nice subtle glisten to its web, while the direct sunlight lit up the blurred bushes in the background, adding depth and helping us create an interesting image. But this composition wasn't so engaging when the light changed. First, the sun went in, which plunged the background into darkness, ruining the colours and that sense of depth. And then less than a minute later, it came back out with a vengeance, obliterating the spider, really overlighting it way too harshly and apparently blinding me into missing focus. Lighting also plays a huge part in image quality. Now, some iPhone users have expressed concern at the fact that this Super Telephoto lens only works with a 12 megapixel camera on the iPhone, not the 48 megapixel one. But more megapixels equals more resolution. It doesn't equal sharper, more detailed, less noisy images. If you want sharp and more detailed photos, You need to get light in through the lens and hitting the sensor, but not any light. In fact, it's impossible for me to say shoot in this light and you will get these results, but I can at least give you some guidance and some recommendations. Sunrise golden hour is amazing for shooting morning dew. Just don't forget about those techniques we've gone through so far. Midday sun, especially in the summer, can easily wash out macro scenes with harsh, unflattering light. Instead, look for opportunities in shaded areas. For example, within flower beds, there are often macro subjects that are being shaded by the flowers around them. Otherwise, you could use something else to cast a shadow, like your hand or whatever else you happen to have with you. But if that doesn't work, then clouds are your best friend. During spring and summer, cloudy, overcast days can actually work really well because the clouds soften and diffuse the light, but there's still enough of it around to create a bright environment for sharp, detailed photos. When it is sunny, I recommend waiting until the sun is lower in the sky so that it's coming in at more of an angle, like right before or during the evening golden hour. These B examples were shot at that time, and even though they're in direct sunlight, it hasn't ruined the images. Instead, it's produced really vivid colours, really interesting specular highlights, and some cool shadows, which all add to the dimensionality of the compression. Dimensionality of the compression. First of all, what's this all about? And dimensionality of the compression. Anyway, just don't leave it too late to shoot, because sunset and evening golden hour lighting can be stunning. But if you leave it too late, the sun gets too low. As macro subjects are often quite low to the ground, that's the first area where you lose light and it gets too dark to produce a beautiful image. Here, I left it too late, but I used that exposure reticle that we saw earlier. I placed it on the sun, which causes the phone to try and expose for the sun by using a really, really fast shutter speed and causing the foreground, in this case this thing, to be silhouetted and look cool. So I managed to salvage it. And before I go, if you are a beginner photographer or you are unsure of yourself or you don't like the images that you're taking, have a look at some of the macro images that I captured while making this video. So don't worry if you're not happy with the quality of your photos. It's perfectly normal, and instead of being frustrated and feeling down on yourself, just have a laugh at them and it makes you feel better. I look at these and I think, I'm supposed to be the instructor in this situation and I'm capturing this? Really? It's fine. So if you've enjoyed this macro masterclass, please let me know what you've learned in the comments and over on the Reeflex Piazza Facebook group as well. And don't forget, there are other masterclass videos as part of this series. So go and check those out. I'll see you there. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching.